How are you?
Good to see you, Nick.
Welcome. You two have a good story. A 13-year, at least like
Most of which we can talk
11-year
about publicly.
partnership. Well, let's see how much we can talk about publicly here. More than a 10-year partnership between the city and JPMorgan Chase. Let's start at the beginning. How did this happen?
So I got my boss, Jamie Dimon, who has many brilliant ideas, generally mostly sane ideas, called me in sort of late summer 2013. Detroit had just, as Tim mentioned, entered bankruptcy, largest municipal bankruptcy in the history. And he said, why don't you go out to Detroit and see how we could help? And it took me a minute to make sure this was serious. I wasn't being punked. And the fact is, if you looked at the national headlines at the time, it was not a pretty picture. The bankruptcy, city was completely dysfunctional. Ambulances wouldn't show up, buses wouldn't show up. The unemployment rate, I think, was about 24%. But when you got there, there was election. My first visit there, the election campaign was going on when the mayor was first running, and we saw this candidate actually talking about bringing people together and partnership and collaboration. We got inspired, and so we spent, even before he took office, we spent about 6 months on the ground thinking about ways in which we might help support the city's recovery. And then he actually tells a better story of how it actually...
Mr. Mayor, what's your line on this? Some guy from New York shows up thinking you know how to fix it?
Well, it is. So I had just been elected, and it was a pretty unusual campaign, but when a white guy runs in an 83% African-American city, everybody assumed that I had no chance, and I won by a pretty good margin. But what I had won after the election was a city already in bankruptcy, probably $20 billion in debt. Half the street lights were out. The ambulances didn't show up for an hour. And I'm trying to figure out how to sort this out. I haven't taken office yet. My assistant comes in and interrupts a meeting, which is unusual, and she says, Jamie Dimon's on the phone. And I said, that's funny. There's a guy at JPMorgan with the same name. And she said, I think it's him. I said, I didn't think Jamie Dimon knew who I was. So I pick up the phone. I recognize the voice. He says, Mike, I think America's turned its back on Detroit for far too many years. And I want to reverse that. I want to have this fella, Peter Scheer, come see. I think we can invest $50 million to get going. Well, that's nice, because Detroit, we feel like manufacturing left, state government left, federal government left. It was an unusual call. And then Peter did come to town, and our first meeting wasn't, hey, send me a check and go away. I said, I could use your expertise on our mortgage problems to get these vacant houses, and I could use your expertise on the small business loans because I got these vacant storefronts. I could use your expertise on the workforce because we got to get our folks working. And Peter hasn't been able to leave for the last 12 years.
Yeah, and by
the start of a beautiful friendship.
by the time I left that meeting, the $50 million became $100 million. So funny how that works.
I mean, let's leave aside a pretty passable Jamie Dimon impersonation you started off there at the start. Get in a little bit more into those specifics. So, you had a laundry list at the beginning. How did you begin to implement that? How did you begin to move the needle on those topics?
So it started with, and Peter came in and showed me a plan. And then I took his paper, I put it aside, and I said, let me show you where we need you to be. But we had a problem right out of the gate. We had 47,000 abandoned houses in the city. People had bailed on the city. 200,000 people had left in a decade. But a lot of those houses were solid brick homes. And I had this idea I could sell them on the internet. And people could fix them up. But of course, no bank would give a mortgage, to somebody to fix up a house in Detroit. And the very first thing they did was set up a partnership that made loans to start that. Today, 15,000 houses that were abandoned a decade ago now have been fixed up and have families in them, and they helped us get that ball rolling.
And one of the important things I would say about our partnership is sometimes you go to a city and the mayors or powers that be will say, well, just give me a check and I'll figure out how to spend it, and we kind of run away when that happens. And the mayor will say, help me figure out how to fix this problem. And if there are things that can be done better outside City Hall than inside City Hall, it was all just how do you actually fix the problem? How do you work with partners, local partners? Look, JPMorgan can't go into Detroit or any other city and say, hey, we're the guys from Wall Street, we're going to tell you how to fix the problems. But when you have the right players working together on the ground, that's where we can really help support and influence, both with resources, but also our just technology and intellectual expertise.
Well, this is like a little bit here. Like, I think, Mayor, you've talked about this. It's like, it's not just cutting a check. It's literally like it's getting on the plan and it's going there and it's figuring out what the pieces of that puzzle are.
Yeah, and one of the things we created, I mean, the mayor has said, I mean, he's always said, yes, he'll take the financial investment, but we would put, one of the things we created out of this was something called the Detroit Service Corps. We would actually send not just volunteers in, but we would send business people in, finance people, technology people, strategy people to work with different agencies to try to solve problems. He would often take them to Tigers games when they were in town. These are people who would literally come from all over the world, who work for JPMorgan Chase, to say, we're going to go into Detroit and work with agencies that the mayor identified or nonprofits to try to help them solve a problem.
Let's stick with housing. Oh, go ahead, Mr.
So I just want to say, this is you would think in a city like Detroit coming out of the housing crisis, embracing Jamie Dimon might be politically problematic. But in the city of Detroit, our residents are so deeply appreciative of somebody who shows up when others are turning away. But I'll give you an example of how personal it got. And there was times when Peter was telling me about new restaurants that opened in Detroit before I knew. It was amazing how they were in. But we had a chance to land a 5,000 employee Jeep assembly plant. And I had a handshake with Fiat Chrysler, except I had this huge piece of a parcel of land that I had acquired that we could park the cars on. But it had a railroad right-of-way running down it. It hadn't been used in 30 years.
Right.
I couldn't get the damn railroad to sell us the right-of-way at any price. And I was down to my last 30 days. I was about to lose 5,000 jobs. And the local company said, sorry, it's over our heads. Our national leadership in New York makes this decision. You're going to have to get them to do it. I pick up the phone and I call Peter. And I said, do you and Jamie know the CEO of the trade? He says, yeah, they're our clients, the railroad. And so I said, I need them to sell me this. 24 hours later, I get a phone call from the local person. You SOB, you had Jamie Dimon call our CEO. They turned the train track over to us, and we have 5,000 jobs. Their commitment has been so far beyond money. It's been a personal partnership.
It was even worse. We actually pulled the CEO off the golf course. It was a Friday night. He called me. We pulled the CEO off the golf course on Sunday, and it's like, you got to fix this problem.
That is a hell of a relationship banking, right?
Yes.
I joke with the mayor. I learned his signals. We were talking about different signals. I knew when someone from his office called and said the mayor wants something. It's okay. It's probably not. If he didn't want to call, sometimes he would text. Don't tell our lawyers. But then when he called on a Friday afternoon. I was like, okay, something's going down. So you sort of learn the urgent signals.
But this gets back to what you were saying. It's not about like showing up and just dropping a check and then getting back to the airport. It's that ongoing relationship to solve problems.
Yeah, and we can't solve everything. There's not a lot we can do, but we have learned a lot. Heather Higginbottom's sitting in the back of our room, who runs all our policy and insights. We've learned a lot about what works, right? And we can apply that, and the willingness to actually work in partnership with. And I think the mayor's attitude is, I'm going to work with anyone who wants to help me solve a problem. I'm not going to get into ideological litmus tests or anything like that.
That's the way mayors work.
Well,
right?
yes, you would hope. Mostly. I actually, one thing is, I hope at some point some of the people who actually serve in Washington would take some lessons from how mayors work, because I think we get a lot more done in this town.
So we talked about housing, which is a huge issue. I know there's another massive issue, which Mike and the mayor talked about before, just like education and workforce development. Where did that fit on your list? What were the
so again,
solutions
this is where a partnership goes beyond it. When you're at a 20% unemployment rate, and you've got a lot of folks in our town who had a high school degree and wanted to work hard, wanted to get skills, what do we do? They actually commissioned a study of what was going on, and their report, I read it and I'm like, duh, I've lived here my whole life, but what it showed was that the high-end jobs were in the city and suburbanites were driving in, and the middle-skilled jobs were in the suburbs at the different smaller factories and Detroiters were driving out. Literally every day, we were passing each other on the road until I got jobs in the city that Detroiters could be trained to do. We weren't going to change things. And their report helped us set up a whole workforce where we then sourced for every company people who wanted jobs, and we started filling them. But every time Jamie would come to town, I said, look, I love your report, but you guys need to move a call center here. Tell me why you can't have a call center in Detroit. I got all this vacant space. Put a call center in Detroit and hire Detroiters. Jamie finally got so tired of me saying, when are you going to do this, that he told Peter to solve it. But these guys, he'll tell you what they did. They didn't go get a call center. They came up with a whole different
How did you solve it?
So the mayor's he was less polite in the call. He would bang on us every time. You got to move a call center. And like we would look at this and try and listen. One of the things they said from the beginning, they're not interested in charity. They want to create sustainable business.
Not just a check,
right?
Not
just a check, not charity. And we tried very hard to see how we can make the numbers work on a call center. And I know this will sound shocking coming from an executive at JPMorgan Chase. We did realize that some jobs after COVID could be done from home. Don't please no one tell Jamie I said that. And we actually, after COVID, we were looking at this and said, well, what if we actually tried hiring some people from home to do call center jobs? These are jobs that usually you bring people in the office, they sit in front of a computer taking calls. And so we finally got agreement from the business to hire 30 people. Just we're going to test this out.
Right.
I called the mayor. I said, listen, here's what we're going to try. That was a Thursday night. So Detroit at Work, which was the agency that he created, within like probably a week, they had produced for us 250 very qualified resumes of people. So even though we started at 30, we actually hired they committed to 30. We hired 50. We saw very quickly that not only were these calls among some of the highest quality calls, because these are not happy calls. These are not people calling saying, hey, we just want to tell you how much we love Chase. These are people saying there's something screwed up in my account or my debit card didn't work. So you need like some finesse and skill
It's a hard
to handle
job.
these are hard jobs. The net approval, the sort of customer satisfaction scores were 97%. Okay, and they were cheaper. So what we haven't actually announced publicly yet is what we thought were 30. By the end of this year, will be 150 people in Detroit, or the Detroit call center. Probably doing 1.5 million, 2 million calls a year. And what I would say to other mayors,
And what are they making?
oh, they're making now probably $27, $28 an hour, full medical benefits, and they love it. I mean, and hopefully some of them will actually move into other jobs. We've replicated it in Baltimore with Governor Wes Moore and Brandon Scott, and we've just announced we're going to do one in Atlanta. So these are, I mean, listen, the overall message from this experience is there's a lot of talent sitting in these cities, and if we can start breaking down some of these barriers to opportunity, they're amazing things. And by the way, we're making money off these call centers. This is not like
not charity.
This is not charity at all. By the way, I shouldn't, in case I don't have a chance, our deposits in Detroit, the mayor said people like JPMorgan Chase have gone up by over $20 billion since we've done this. And listen, I think people like us. The economy's growing, and that's good for us.
So before we get the hook here, would you mention like the replicability of that is moving to other cities? This partnership like this, for folks in the room who are thinking about like, I've got challenges in my city, like what are the lessons they can take, aside from calling Jamie Dimon and getting to take care of it, what are you think lessons they can learn from this kind of partnership?
I had to make it politically able for Jamie Dimon and a bank to come into the city of Detroit. It was my responsibility to make sure they came in a way that was sensitive. It wasn't hard. They were intuitively there. They invested in affordable housing. They invested in African-American and Latino-owned businesses. They came in a good way, but I knew they had struck gold when we have these community meetings. 300, 400 people come out every quarter to tell me all the things I'm doing wrong. And there is a 90-year-old woman, well known in Detroit, known as Mother Bernice, who will whack you with her umbrella if she doesn't think you're doing well. She stood up at one of the meetings, and I thought she was going to complain about something I was doing in an alley in her neighborhood. And she said, do you realize what Chase has done? Everybody in this church should go out and move their account to Chase. And I said, wow, this is the community speaking, and this is what happens when you get a good corporate partner.
Well, I would say we were talking about this earlier. Listen, banks are not universally loved. I hate to break the news, late breaking news. and we have a lot of, we monitor social media. And at one point, this was a few years ago, I said, there's probably 10 or 15% people who just don't like the fact that you're working with a bank like ours. And he says, yeah, but there's like 85 or 90% who do. And like you can't be held captive to that. And I find, and Tom has seen this over many years, the most effective mayors are the ones who are saying, I'm going to fix the problem. I'm not going to worry about, whether people like this. Is not a social club or a popularity contest. We're going to go in and figure out how best to fix the problem.
I mean, that comes back to the whole angle on mayors. It's the problem solvers. There's Republicans, there's Democrats and mayors. And America now says, let's find someone to fix the problem. Whoever that problem is, if the problem gets fixed, that's the win.
Yeah.
Before we get the hook, let's end on one fun thing. You're a DC guy, spend a lot of time in Detroit. What's your favorite part about going? What great restaurants have you told the mayor he needs?
Well, we told actually, the New York Times just listed Detroit as one of the 52 places to visit. So there's a lot. I was going to say one of the favorite things I used to love doing was go to Detroit Lions games.
We'll get to that.
The mayor's taken me to 2 over the years, and the Lions have lost both times. So Sunday night after the Tampa Bay, where they came in and he texted me just to make sure I would be nowhere near the city of Detroit on Saturday night.
You are not coming to cheer for the Washington Commanders at our stadium. Yes.
All right, well, here we go. One football thing for the road. Make your picks. You're a DC town. Commanders are on fire. Lions are good, though.
We've waited 60 years for that. Commanders have only waited 30 years. It's our turn.
Peter, you going to go against that?
I am incredibly proud of what the Commanders have accomplished, and I think it's going to be an amazing game Saturday night.
That's the way the banker's going to answer that one.
Peter
Duggan,
Daniels.
thank you so much for being here. Huge thanks for JPMorgan Chase for powering today. Huge thanks to the Youngest Conference of Mayors for partnering with us with this. Thanks so much. See you out on the road and stick around. The conversation continues.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.